As we know, getting to the truth in our investigations is always a challenging issue. It's a challenging issue when we're looking at high school students and trying to determine what may or may not have happened in a potential harassment, intimidation, or bullying issue, or any kind of student conduct issue. But there are some unique challenges that come with interviewing younger students as well and trying to figure out what may have happened with elementary students or middle school students. So I'm very pleased to have with me today Dr. Nancy Richmond. Nancy comes to us with tremendous experience as a school principal at the elementary and middle school levels, and with just a wealth of knowledge on working with students at this level to try to address potential student conduct issues and determine what may have really occurred in a particular incident. So Nancy, thank you so much for being with me today.
It's a pleasure to be here, thank you.
Just for our viewers, why don't you talk a little bit about your background?
Okay, I spent 34 years in elementary, middle school in New Jersey. Interestingly, I started as an assistant principal in a middle school, which was like a big start for me because I had been a primary teacher. And then I was a principal in an elementary school for the next 20 years. So I have, I think, a good understanding of how younger children are wired, the things that frighten them, the things that motivate them. And I also have a special ed background. So when I was a principal, I welcomed the opportunity to have self-contained special education classes in my building. And again, I think I have a pretty good sense of the unique challenges that those students present in situations that we'll be talking about today.
Absolutely. So let's talk about a few of the unique issues that could come up for younger kids. Let's say you have a very young elementary student, kindergarten, first grade, and there was some sort of a potential issue involving a number of kids at that age level. What are some of the challenges that come up with figuring out what really happened?
Well, I think first of all we have to kind of put ourselves in the position of the student, and there are probably a couple emotions that bubble to the surface when we are talking to young children, whether it's our conversation with the victim or our conversation with the accused. And in the case of everyone, I think the emotions will be fear and anxiety. They're anxious about this. Students are feeling very vulnerable when they are brought into a situation where there's a person in authority who wants to talk to them, maybe a couple of people who they don't know. They're afraid, they're feeling alone, they're anxious about what this is all about. So I think we need to consider those things as we plan our investigation, because I do think that with young children, it's important to try to get it right the first time, while it's fresh in their minds, while they're still feeling, if you're the victim and you're being questioned about it, while they're still feeling the emotion of how it felt to have that happen. So I think it's good to try to get it right the first time. And so good planning for it is going to be critical to the successful outcome.
Absolutely. And knowing the particular student, every student has their own unique differences, isn't that right?
That's for sure, yes. Yeah. And the other thing I want to say up front is that as we're interviewing young children, I think we need to watch for the red flags.
Sure.
Sometimes things will come up unintentionally or not even related to a topic that we're talking about that we need to make note of. If a student is especially fearful, you can't tell my parents, you can't tell my parents.
Yes.
There's a little red flag going up there. So I think we need to really pay attention to those things too, and maybe it will need some other subsequent follow-up.
Sure. For young children, do they sometimes have a hard time focusing and giving you sort of the straightforward information that you want from them?
Absolutely. And so that's why the questioning needs to be pretty strategic.
Yes.
I think we need to plan how we're going to approach this, and let the questioning flow from how the student is responding. We can start with some closed questions and then go to more open-ended questions as the student gets comfortable. The big thing here, I think, is creating a climate so we get to a conversation. We don't want question, answer. So we need to assure the student we're just here. I would say to a student, my job is to make sure everyone in this school is safe here. And we need to talk about what's happening, and we need to find out what happened so that it doesn't continue to happen. And I think we should define the purpose of the conference in that way. That's what this is about, so that they're clear that there won't be judgment immediately as much as just let's talk about what happened.
Sure. As students get a little bit older at the middle school level, there are a lot of things that they're going through, right? You're going through puberty, you're going through some changes. Does that make it challenging sometimes to get students to cooperate with an authority figure who's trying to question them about an incident?
Yeah, I think it does complicate it. The social setting for middle school students is critical. And if I'm the accused, I'm vulnerable because my friends may drop me, may make judgments about me.
Yeah.
If I'm the victim, similar. People know what's happening. It's terribly, I'm embarrassed, and I'm vulnerable. I don't want to be telling on them because that will cause more social problems. So I think the social aspect of how the middle school student is wired makes it much more complicated.
So that fear of being ostracized is just magnified, isn't it, at that level?
It is, yes. More important for the middle school student than the elementary student. I think they haven't quite thought about that as much as the middle school student. They're very connected to social things and to friends and so forth.
Sure. In the video scenario that we had viewers look at, one of the students who ended up being interviewed had a learning disability. What are some of the things we want to think about if you're interviewing a student who may have a disability?
I think, first of all, we need to be planning who needs to be present. So in the case of a student with a disability, we may need to include a teacher or another adult that the student knows and is comfortable with, and someone that the student can trust. That person also may be in a position to help us rephrase questions in a way that the student with a disability might better understand.
Sure.
So it might be the student's teacher, it might be a case manager for that student, someone who will help us know the best way to be clear to the student. In terms of the student's contribution to the conversation, sometimes I think it's important if they may have difficulty writing something down, so we might script that. We might have someone take down word for word what the student is saying. Some students who do not yet have written language skills, we may need to ask them to draw a picture of where are you when this is happening, how did you feel, a little picture. Sometimes we can give them props,
Sure.
what are your feelings about what's happening?
Sure.
Pictures of smiley faces and sad faces and square faces, and so they can point that out.
Yes, that's really important in understanding the developmental level of the student and how that student might express himself or herself, and giving them various options.
Right. In general, I think we can expect very short answers, not just as a function of their disability, but factor it in their fear and their anxiety. So we need to, I think, patiently and supportively try to bring out all they can give us.
So as a longtime principal, obviously, as wonderful as your schools were, incidents came up.
Yes.
Right? And how do we think through, where do we do this investigation? I'm sure you had a million people who always wanted to see you. You're the school principal.
Yes. I think the other part of planning for the conversation is deciding where to do that. Sometimes coming into the principal's office or even to a formal conference room is going to be intimidating for a student who already is a little frightened and anxious. So I think we need to be very deliberate about thinking about where this happens. First of all, we want to assure their privacy.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing worse than having a door open in a room and kids are walking by and say, oh, you know, he's in trouble now.
Yes.
So first of all, privacy. Second, certainly comfort.
Yes.
And I think we need to be thinking about the arrangement of the furniture in the place.
Sure.
If I'm sitting behind my desk and I'm going to talk to this student in a chair that's way too big for him, there's something between us here. I can say I'm here to support you and I'm concerned about you, but that desk is saying, you know, it's me against you.
Yes.
So I always recommend a round table.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no sides of the table. Maybe the student's teacher or case manager and he's on the same side around a table. So I think that those little things can kind of take the edge off of the seriousness and the anxiety that a student may be feeling, and thus we'll get a better outcome.
So a student's brought in, you know, most kids aren't going to the principal's office every day or meeting with...
A few do.
Few do. We have a few, absolutely, who do, and you know, you get used to that group. Most kids aren't. So,
Right.
How do we start off this interview?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, why are we here?
I think that's an important thing, to define the purpose for
Yes.
this conversation. And I think we just need to be very forthcoming about that. We need to say some things have been happening. If I'm talking to the victim, some things have been happening, and I understand they're very upsetting to you, and my job is to find out what's happening and to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's what we need to talk about. I'm here to support you, and we're going to get to the bottom of this, and so you don't have to be feeling this way in the future.
So is it important to kind of set the right tone, break the ice, make that student feel like, okay, I can talk?
Yeah, I think that's important with young students, rather than getting right into the meat of it.
Yes.
To say, you know, how's your day going?
Sure.
Did you have a good lunch? Did you get to go out after lunch and play? So, or how's that new puppy of yours? If you happen to, you know, just kind of reach out to them and try to make it as a climate that's as comfortable as possible.
Is it tempting sometimes? I mean, sometimes you'll have a really sad or emotional issue that comes up. Is it tempting to show your emotions?
It certainly is tempting, because sometimes we hear things that really aren't very nice.
Sure.
And so, you know, for a person who cares about kids, here we are hearing a child kind of pour his heart out about something that's really awful. I think we need to be deliberate about not showing our emotion. If a student says something to me about something that's happening to him, if I say, oh my gosh, you poor kid, this is terrible, how can this be happening? That just adds anxiety for that student. It says, boy, maybe this is worse than I thought it was. So I think the emotion that we want to convey is one of caring and support, and just, you know, listen without emotion.
Sure, and not exacerbating the issue and
Yes.
making it even bigger than it may have actually been.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So getting written statements from kids, is that important for us to look to do?
I think we should, if we can. Starting in about middle first grade, they should be able to write even simple sentences about what happened. We might consider developing a form that they could just fill in a few words rather than complete sentences. So, you know, tell where this is happening, tell when it is happening, tell us this event that was so upsetting. So I think we should certainly make an effort to get something in writing from them that we can refer to later. Have them draw pictures as
Sure.
might work. And then again, if there's an opportunity to have in the oral interview someone take down their words, I think that will make the case or help us to get accurate information.
And I know sometimes it's difficult to do that because the temptation might be to fix the student's grammar, to
Yes,
say
yes,
things
yes.
more clearly.
Right.
But you might end up missing some really important information by doing that.
Yes, I think the more exact it can be, and actually there are little hints along the way there. If they
Sure, that's right.
break down or stumble over something, we say, this is an important piece, maybe we need to talk more about this.